Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Pelle Neroth Taylor, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the program today. Very excited to have you here. You're an author, you're on TNT Radio, you produce documentaries. I'd like to, at some point during the conversation, talk about all of those things. I'll throw it to you, though, just to get you to briefly introduce yourself, because you're new to the program. We haven't had you on before.
Right. Well, my name is Pelle Neroth Taylor. I was born in London, and then at the age of 7, I went to Sweden with my mother. My parents separated. Stayed there until I was 15, went through the school system, came to England to do A-levels, which is our high school certificate, at a school called Westminster, which is like Eton, basically, around Westminster Abbey, inside that courtyard. And after that, I went to Bristol University and then got a job in journalism, at The Economist, actually. And then I worked for the European. And then I became a sub-editor at the Guardian and was doing freelance for many years, various kind of freelance shifts at the Independent and the Times and the Guardian, mostly subbing. And I was spent some time going back and forth to Brussels to and I worked sort of freelancing back articles. I'd spend a couple of days in London and then a couple of days in Brussels staying with friends, because I thought that Brussels and the EU is a big upcoming story. And I really enjoyed the sort of multilingual, multinational atmosphere. It was a fireside. It was a campfire of the world. I mean, even more than Washington, probably, because everyone comes through Brussels at some point or other, all the legislation, all the corporate chiefs, bankers, and so on, and they were quite easy to get hold of, the drinks party after whatever they'd come for. So I made a lot of really good contacts, and I thought it was really interesting. I'd probably failed to see the larger story of bureaucratic overreach. I was too close to the subject, or rather, maybe I was kind of captured by the EU. I rather liked everything, all the people who were in favor of Brexit, there were a really motley sort of, I don't know, a kind of a pirate crowd, I'd call them. They couldn't get girlfriends type, and rabid sort of, they're kind of out of touch Churchillian nationalists, and they talked about Britain that didn't really exist. Or didn't exist anymore, because I knew that, because I went back and forth to London, and some of them had lived in Brussels for many years, and they had kind of Churchill ties, and quoted Churchill, and they thought they were fighting the Nazi tyranny. In my view, it was delusional, but I think they were right to some extent, even though they exaggerated their language. But anyway, I thought that the trouble with covering the EU was that it got, it's hard. You lose touch with human beings and touch with reality, and you end up just writing 2 points of view of the legislation, and you have to go to different lobby groups, basically, and that's unsatisfying. You don't get to make up your own mind, because they have so much more specific knowledge than you do on a topic, and became a bit technical. Although, I joined it for a while, and then I thought, what am I going to do? Because I was bouncing around in the sort of sub-editor stratum of English journalism, and I didn't really know. I didn't know what I was doing wrong, I think, and I met a girl who I'd met at university who was Swedish, and she was an exchange student at our UK university, and we got back in touch and emailed each other. And I went to see her, and decided to stay in Sweden, sort of move in with her. And I sold a flat in London and used that money to basically kind of fund a project of writing books and kind of rediscovering what I really wanted to write about, because I thought I started off by writing about Swedish topics, because I thought, well, I'll make Sweden my territory. I mean, in the very, very crowded international market of journalism, at least if I can use that as a base and then maybe expand to other topics. But I'll have that to myself, because I thought, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's true of any small country. Journalists come from abroad and they'll spend 2 days there and they'll go away again. And I thought there's such a disparity between what the real Sweden and what they wrote about, often in very cliched terms. And I spoke the language fluently, and I thought several really good stories. So I settled in Sweden and started writing these, like the Olof Palme book, like Sweden's Pierre Trudeau. And then I started writing about these British psyops that were taking place in Swedish waters, where they sent in submarines and they pretended they were Russian submarines, and with the collaboration of the Swedish Navy. And that really destroyed the reputation of the Swedish government, because they seemed to be not able to do anything about it. And it basically introduced me. It was like the red pill into the world of psyops. And once you realize that these things go on, you can never go back. And you just discover. It's like some people discover it through 9/11. Some people discover it through the Kennedy assassination. But I mean, I realized that maybe the reason why I wasn't getting promotions in London was I was too honest. I didn't know how to play the game. And I started. So I wrote those books. And then I wrote one about immigration in Sweden, because I thought Sweden's changing very fast. And I made a film with a friend, 2 films, one about feminism and one about immigration. And then I wrote a book about World War One and a couple of other things. I had a lot of time, especially during COVID. There was a lot of time, and I really wanted to get into the depth of something. So I read several hundred books on World War One. I mean, not all the books, but I mean, it's a proper history book, and I've put that out. And it's the origins of World War One, and nothing what you think it is. I mean, there are other mainstream books that have been written about it, but the truth is even worse than you think. You think that most Anglos have bought the Anglo picture, British picture, except the Americans, because the Americans were very pissed off with the British after World War One, because they'd been inveigled into fighting their war. And I think the Canadians and the Australians and Swedes, let's say, who are part of the Anglo-cultural sphere, think this is Germans are the bad guys and the British are the good guys. Not true at all. The war was started by the approximate war was because of the Russian and the French, who were allied with the British, attacking Germany, advancing on Germany from both sides after the assassination of Sarajevo, which was probably sponsored by Russian intelligence. So people accuse me of being pro-Russian. I'm not. I'm just going with the truth. In that case, the Russians were kind of the bad guys, and the British piled in as well, because they could squeeze Germany easily, and Germany was a rival. There was a war of power and who was going to be top dog, and the British saw their chance. It wasn't about good versus bad guys at all. Anyway, so and then I got there's a guy at TNT called Dirk Poolman, who he and I have worked together on some Swedish topics. Being German, he's very fond of Sweden. The Germans see Sweden as a sort of purer version of themselves. If they hadn't been bombed, if they hadn't had Nazis, if they hadn't had communism, that's what Germany would have. So they idealize Sweden, and they even have, like, believe it or not, like soap operas set in Sweden where they speak German. Can you believe it? So it's really their little lost paradise. Nearly all Germans, they go there and they recognize a Germanic culture, a Germany that is more innocent and less, aggressive or whatever. So he goes to Sweden every year, and so we worked a little bit. And then he likes my stuff and felt that TNT I should do a show for them, because by this time I'd kind of caught up on a lot of the red-pilled issues that you find in the alternative media. Though even so, my specialism is like geopolitics, I guess, and Russia propaganda, MI6, CIA, things like that. I'm not that hot on climate change or vaccines and so on, although I'm very open to the fact that everything that anti-vaxxers could say is right. And even if they're not right, they're worth listening to, because the truth might be 50-50. So it's in some direction shifted towards what they're saying, even though some of them go a bit too far. And I'm very glad that we're having that discussion. I've certainly learned some things, and I've learned about climate change. I thought, well, climate change is happening, I think. But whether it's human man-made and the extent to which it can be avoided and the extent to which it's dangerous are really interesting topics and worth discussing. I'm not that worried about it, but I think that's, but my producer at TNT puts me on to all kinds of people, because there's some people on TNT who really have their hobby horses on these specific topics. But I'm glad that they put some of those people on to me, and then I can ask basic questions about it. So, but so I'm really enjoying it. I mean, I think that I now sort of see, and I'm on a kind of crusade against the Guardian and the Telegraph and all those papers in London, because I think that they're completely dishonest about many things, and I think you have to sell yourself out if you want to be part of that world, or you're not intelligent enough. So, I mean, I look at my peer group, because I was at journalism school in London, and some of them have done quite well at the BBC and the Telegraph. But I mean, a lot of them I never thought they were that bright, actually. And now I realize maybe if you are too bright, you can't get onto these places. And I don't think they're doing good work. They've got pension schemes. But I think we're moving into a world where Tucker Carlson gets 100 million views on X or whatever, 100 million page impressions. And I'm omnivorous when it comes to information. I really want to find out what's going on in the world, and not if the BBC did provide the best news, I'd go for it. And I go for it anyway, because I want to see what everyone else has been told of what is happening. But nearly all my sources are non-mainstream, So, and I'm really just want to find out what's going on. There's so many really good journalists out there. It's just that they don't work for the Guardian or the BBC. I very seldom consult them for. In Swedish media, even worse. So I'm very happy, and especially when you see these large-scale job losses all over the mainstream media. I'm glad to be where I am. It's the best kind of journalism. That said, with television or interview shows, I mean, I'm meeting a lot of really bright people, really interesting people every day, and it's quite stressful because you have to specialize and find out about their topics, and I can do it. I'm not tired yet. That said, it's a totally different game from focusing and becoming a specialist on one topic and reading about it. So I've gone from two worlds, one from being living in quite a solitary life and reading books and books and books and telegrams, National Archives, most of which is available online, to sort of talking to people all over the world, So it's highly enjoyable and very stimulating. And it's really good. I think I enjoy talking to Americans. I mean, I realized that, as I said, I'm quite pro-European still. A lot of people are, but I don't have that many Europeans on the program, because the English language is just such a uniting factor, I think. And it's amazing that even though we're living in different continents and so on, the Anglosphere does exist culturally, and we do understand each other, I think. And you don't have to. The trouble is, when you speak to somebody who doesn't speak English like a native language, you have to slow down and censor yourself and make it more simple. And that's so frustrating sometimes. It's worse to be the fluent guy. If you're not fluent, you do your best. But if you're fluent and you're speaking to somebody who speaks less well than you do, it's frustrating. And I find that after all, I'm still more affiliated with the Anglo world than I am with the Swedish world, even though I speak that language fluently. So it's a kind of homecoming, even though I'm talking to Americans and Canadians, and I'm half Swedish. It's a very strange experience. Yeah. So the Commonwealth kind of still exists, and it's very good. It's very easy to call Americans and Canadians very open people as well. And so if I can offer some self-criticism, I'm based in Europe, and I'm supposed to be the kind of European correspondent. End up just talking to Americans. What kind of European correspondent is that? I'm getting some Dutch people on, some Germans, but I mean, as for the French, forget it. Italians. They're just, we are on different. So there is no European demos really, and that's why I'm quite interested in Canada, because do you have a demos? Do you have a real country there, even though you have two different languages? If it doesn't work in Canada, the French and in English, if they can't coexist there, can they coexist anywhere?
Well, in fact, here it's not just about two languages anymore. It's I just saw our three main political leaders at an event with a bunch of Khalistanis speaking a third language, at this event. So it's becoming a multilingual country, if not officially, unofficially, that's for sure. Your journey in journalism has been very interesting. Do you feel like you have more freedom? And when I ask that, I want to frame it this way. I'm finding that in order for online podcasters, streamers, journalists to be successful, you almost need to, I think you do sort of need to pick a side or take a strong position on something to attract an audience that supports your channel. You're sort of like a conservative, or you're a socialist, or you're picking a side on something so that you kind of build a tribe around you. I find that it's difficult to explore all sides of an issue and get a passionate, loyal following. Does this situation give you more or less freedom as a journalist to be honest with people?
I don't feel any restraints or any. I don't look at my own audience figures, put it that way, and I haven't had any complaints that I'm not attracting enough people. But I think probably I'm more kind of not see both sides kind of guy, but I feel that I'm on a journey to find out the truth, and I hope I've got some people pursuing that, because some of my topics can be quite complicated. But I might come to that stage where I realize I have to be more like partisan, and emotional, if you like, and like, I don't know, Steve Bannon or something, and more rah-rah, like a lot of Americans, and like American talk radio, and where you find that you don't actually talk, because why do people read the news, sometimes to inform themselves, and sometimes to think and feel on a higher plane, but also it's often just as a kind of reconfirmation of who you are, as you said, this identity thing. And you wouldn't believe, as probably you haven't been in the business much longer than I have, people listen to it in the bathroom and in the car and while their children are playing and so on. So it's probably an illusion to think that they're following your every nuance, Mm-hmm. So what you do is you're repetitive, and then you kind of, you create a feeling in people that you're on their side and that you're comfortable, they're comfortable, and that they feel like better people, they're at home, and it generates a tribal feeling. I think some other presenters at TNT are better at that than I am. But I think, I'll kind of pursue my line until I get told not to, or until some realization happens. At the moment, I'm following my personality, which is sort of always questing for the truth, and probably quite moderate in a way, trying to, I talk to some very pro-Israeli people, some people are anti-Israeli, and I let them have their say,
Yeah, when I look at your work, it seems to me to be very moderate. But I do understand why some people might say, "Oh, he's pro-Russian," but then at the same time, I know that you focus on issues like immigration, so someone might watch some of your work or read your work and think that you're more right-wing or conservative.
Well, I tell you what, I don't even know if I'm right-wing or left-wing myself. I mean, what's that? I honestly don't know. I mean, I always thought of myself as definitely not left-wing doctrinaire, probably more right-wing, but I'm, as you said, on immigration, I'm classically right-wing, I guess. And that's what alienated me from a lot of leftish people. I got into, my film's taken off Amazon and shadow banned and all that. And I've had problems sometimes. I was doing some translation jobs in Sweden and Norway, and they Google you. It's always a young woman, they're Googling you because they want to find out about you. Mm-hmm. And he's doing this, we can't have him, and then they don't say, they just said that there are no translation jobs available. Mm-hmm. But then on Russia, I guess, I'm pro peace, I'm libertarian. I mean, it's like Tucker Carlson or something like that. That's where I stand, and he's a conservative. It's the old style conservatism, which is not doctrinaire neocon, and sort of my studies of the CIA and MI6 and all the things the British have done, make me sort of realize that whenever the Brits accuse the Russians of having assassinated people, which they probably very well do, the Brits do it too. Okay, so I mean, let's not kid ourselves. And the Americans, of course, do it too. Maybe more. So often when the British media are talking about what the bad things the Russians are doing, even if it's true, you can tell the truth without telling the truth. Because the real truth would be, well, yeah, everybody knocks off each other. Everybody does this. Yeah, Russians are no different. but they're creating this war hysteria against the Russians, which is going to end the planet if it comes true, if we listen to them too much. And I think they're, I think it's terrible. So who could possibly want that? We're being manipulated into wars.
Yeah, well, I'm all about trying to hold politicians, leaders accountable for their actions, regardless of what side they're on. And I think you've addressed that by saying that all these countries, all these lettered agencies from all over the world are constantly doing all of this.
God,
Yeah.
it's like an incubus, or it's like a demon or something. So they'll attack someone or create a provocation, and all you see is the response to that provocation, which makes it seem as if they're the aggressors, but in fact it's your little, what the MI6 are doing all the time, everywhere, creating little provocations, and intelligent people are just so duped by it, and they're so arrogant about their ignorance,
Yes.
So yeah.
Some of that has to be on display with all of these protests we're seeing on campuses in Canada, in the United States, especially in the U.S. Do you have any perspective to offer on
I don't
that?
have a very strong view on it, but I sort of take my cue a little bit from the political editor Basil Valentine, who comes on twice on my show, and he's very strongly in favor of the Palestinians and very anti-Israeli. And I go along with that in the sense that you can be, it's these mass killings, if they're true, is terrible. And again, I guess the Russians do it, but in fact, but that is within the laws of war, which is killing mostly other troops, the Ukrainian troops, and they left the civilians more or less alone. And I think we're polluting ourselves if we allow all these tens of thousands of civilians to die, even though I guess some of them are used as human shields. But I'm glad that young people are demonstrating again, I'm glad that they feel strongly about these geopolitical issues and that they moved away from the transgender stuff. So yeah, let it play out, they'll learn or whatever. So, and I think we've seen, I don't know if the I think let's say the intelligence community has always been very worried about organized protest, right? So it's said like the CIA had this LSD program in the 1960s. They actually had an office in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco handing out free LSD, so that the hippie movement was free sex and all that, and drugs. Well, that's anti-revolutionary, right? And thinking about this remote abstract idea of peace, what they're really worried about in intelligence agencies, and I say this as somebody who's right of center, is organized union work or communist type armies of left-wing blue-collar workers who are united, organized, and opposing them. And you could say that without being left or right wing. I think you just observe. And so if you can turn it into a topic that, like the transgender, which is really minority interest, it's 0.1% or 2%, and then turn everyone going fanatical about that, then you don't have to worry about them being revolutionary in another sense. And I'm glad that the students seem to be moving on from that transgender stuff, maybe on to more global issues. And then, because when I grew up, I'm 54. I grew up in the 1980s when the whole of Europe was in anxiety about nuclear war, which could break out from one moment to the next, and you had peace demonstrations and marches from London to Belarus and Stockholm to Paris. None of that. You don't have any of that, and we're more in danger of war than any time in our history. Why? Because people are looking at their phones, or they don't know enough about history, or whatever. I don't know what it is. Or they're worried about climate change. If climate change is happening, it's going to happen over a 40 or 50 year cycle, not over a 5-minute cycle. And now Macron, the French president, has reiterated that he's going to maybe send troops into Ukraine this afternoon. He said it this afternoon. That's insane. And where are the protests? It's just stated. Where is the outrage, And so we were living in a much less dangerous world in the 1980s because both superpowers knew the red lines of the other, and they actually had quite a good relationship behind the scenes, and they respected the other country's power. Now, everyone it's just we're living in really dangerous times, I think. I mean,
Yeah, have we just become too, I guess, conditioned to in the sense that we're just used to living with
yeah,
the nuclear threat, that we're not
that's
taking it
well
seriously
that,
enough?
or we've lived comfortably in great prosperity for so long. I mean, in the 1980s, our governments were run by people in their 60s, let's say, who'd been young conscripts in World War II, and grew up in a poorer world. So there was a great increase in wealth from the 1950s to the 1980s, whereas now we've been prosperous. We've had this post-Cold War bonanza, where we've all been rich, and none of us, I mean, unparalleled prosperity, even if you're poor compared to your peers in richer parts of your own Western country. The non-Westers are still quite poor, and Africa's incredibly poor still. But so with that, and I think that maybe our capacity to look at reality has been changed by all these mobile phones, all these Netflix, all these video games. We don't know if we're living in the real world or in a giant video game anymore. I mean, nothing seems real, and so not even war seems real until it comes.
Well, it really doesn't seem real, especially when you have intelligence operations creating artificial intelligence images, videos, manipulating public opinion during times of war, very sophisticated psyops and information warfare going on. It's hard to tell what's even real online. When you're seeing it, you
That's
don't
right.
know if it's even real anymore.
It's really hard, isn't it? Yeah, and there's probably going to be more of that. But I mean, if you watch play, I don't know what you call it, Call of Duty, those games, ultra realistic, and you play those, and you die, you don't die, you die, but you don't really die. You see a nuclear explosion, you just switch off the machine, and nothing doesn't matter. We haven't experienced, and that's why it reminds me very much of this World War One book, because don't forget the headline the day before the World War broke out was something like, Henley Regatta sees record attendances. So it really was the summer of 1914 where people didn't have a care in the world. So
it does seem like we're experiencing many of the same sorts of things now that took place before the war.
and that was in that golden period, because all the countries were trading with one another, and Russia was expecting a glorious future as a bourgeois country, and Germany and winning all the Nobel prizes, and Europe was at the center of civilization, and all these millions of men died who never had a chance to realize themselves. That Europe died, basically, and you had Bolshevism and fascism and all those things, and then that war didn't need to happen. So,
and what do you make of where we're at right now with this situation in Gaza and Israel? Is this a catalyst for, well, we're already seeing it spread around the world with protests, but is this still likely, in your view, to explode even more?
well, I'm more worried about Ukraine, actually, and I focus most of my attention on that because, let's say, because let's say France goes to war on Russia, they're less vulnerable because they have a lot of countries between them and Russia, and both Russia and France are quite big countries, whereas Israel, although they talk big, they're actually a very small country, obviously, and very vulnerable. The Iranians, I think the Iranians showed with their attack the other day that they've got lots more when that's coming from, and it cost $2 billion for America, and America was exercising a lot of leverage there because everyone, I think, knows that if America hadn't spent those $2 billion and had put in all those air assets to protect Israel, some of those things might have come through. But I think it was also coordinated with the Iranians, because I don't think the Iranians were planning that, but it was sending a signal that, of course, Israel can always go nuclear, but I mean, will even the Israelis, it's a big step. So I think, I don't know what I think. What I heard from a guy I talked to today is that Netanyahu's in real big trouble because wherever he goes, he's going to lose one of his political flanks, because he's got a party on the left and on the right, part of his coalition. So if he goes for this ceasefire, he'll lose the right wingers, and if he goes and he attacks Rafa, he's going to lose what is his name, Benny Gantz.
Yep.
And there might be new elections, and because he's very unpopular, obviously. So the question is whether he's going to escalate, and one option is that he's going to attack south of Lebanon, where Hezbollah are, but they're much better armed than Hamas, and they've got Iran behind them. But that might be because war always unites countries, and that's the trouble. We've got a Britain where the Tory party are going to be wiped out, like the Canadian Tory party are almost, 20 years ago, was it? And they're facing an election this year. And you've got Macron, who's going to be wiped out in the European elections. You've got Biden, who's probably going to lose the elections. You've got is Netanyahu, who might go to jail if he loses power. What have they got to lose if they go to war? I don't know.
Yeah. You've touched on a lot of stuff there, and you talked about Ukraine. You're more concerned about Ukraine. Is that because you're worried that we might actually end up with NATO boots on the ground?
I think that the French have just reiterated, and Macron is a bit crazy. I don't trust him at all, and the French have big egos, and I think they might just do it. And I think the Russians are absolutely. You don't mess with the Russians, I really don't think you do that, and I don't think they bluff. I think that what happens is that the French will be missiled as soon as they set foot in Ukraine. And the question is, it's always someone said that the lesson from the Cold War is not that the big powers have power; it's that the small countries drag larger powers into their conflicts. And obviously, France on its own is quite weak. I mean, their army is 60,000. They don't even have manufacturing capacity. The question is, when France starts losing on the ground there, they'll drag in the rest of NATO. And strictly speaking, it won't be an Article 5 issue. That is, there's no obligation for NATO to go in, and if they go into Ukraine itself, because Ukraine's not a NATO member. But on the other hand, the prestige loss for the West will be so big if you see these French people dying that we might be compelled to do something. And I think there might be a lot of forces in Europe that really support the French, And I think the British were very strongly against, but it's two imperial powers. I mean, that they are incorrigible, really. And I think that there are elements of the British who are quietly encouraging the French. So you go first, and we'll support you when it happens. And maybe even the Americans and Germans are very cautious, and the Americans are said to be absolutely against it. But of course, America has neocons and so on, and they might be dragged in. The only thing, I just don't know, but it's outrageous that one man, Macron, can start a world war. I mean, it's unbelievable, isn't it? Change all our lives forever, because it will make no mistake about it. I mean, millions are going to die. We're going to have rationing. We're not going to have electricity. We're going to have, this is just what, although we talk about these last 2 years as being really transformational, and conflicts rising. We ain't seen nothing yet, And to some extent in Canada and America, you're protected from that. But Sweden has always been a safe zone, but we're only 100 kilometers from Kaliningrad, which is a Russian enclave, and 200 kilometers from St. Petersburg is half an hour by jet. So, what is it? Less than the distance between Edmonton and Calgary or something, incredibly small distances here.
Yes.
So, it's the war is not an abstraction at all.
Yeah, well, the insulation of the oceans
right.
that we've enjoyed here, I think, have largely evaporated because of the technology.
That's true. Well, you got you could be affected by nukes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and submarines, and they can put nukes right off the coast. So we have a constant Cuban Missile Crisis these days without people realizing it.
Right. Yeah.
Pivot over to immigration. This is a subject that you've kind of dealt with. What's the situation with that in Sweden? There's a lot of concern about it over here right now. It is, I think, the most volatile issue right now in the U.S. presidential election, and certainly it's a similar situation here in Canada.
I think there's been a lot of sobering up in the Swedish media. I mean, I held this position. I said, you can, just because you don't want to have open borders doesn't mean you're xenophobic, right? You can hate you can be pro anti-Israel genocide of Palestinians, but also anti-immigration. These are not incompatible things. People found it very hard to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And people were really brainwashed when I first said, because I traveled quite a lot around the world and I've seen immense poverty, and I felt that Swedes didn't realize that they were living in rather promised little land and that it was in danger. It's a fragile ecology, and it's changed. I mean, they take in about 150,000 people a year, mostly on family reunification, and the employment rate of these people is quite low. That is, they're not really assets to the economy, and they're not that well educated. A lot of them come from countries that are, like they do these OECD studies of education levels or national IQ or whatever, Human Development Index, and Afghanistan and Somalia come near the bottom, and those are two countries which provided quite a lot of the immigrations. Sweden is at the top. So there's no, I mean, you see a lot of where in the town I'm in, it's not a suburb. It's not like where all the migrants are from the high-rise areas, which you see maybe on your television screens. It's a middle-class little town. It's like, I don't know, if you know England, it's like Chichester or something like that, traditional old Swedish architecture and things like that. But it's, I mean, if you go to the swimming baths in the weekends, it's 95% non-white, and a lot strolling around in the evening, or if you go to the supermarket, it's quite heavily non-white, and a lot of headscarves and so on. And they're not, there's no trouble. I mean, they're not, I think that there is an exaggeration from the right-wing media. They're always talking about rapes and violence. And to be honest, the number of, Sweden usually has about 80 murders a year, which gives it a murder rate about the same as the rest of Europe. And now it's gone up to about 120. So that's not a big, it's an increase by 50%, but it still puts Sweden at the lower, it's 1.2, which is about the level of France or Britain when it comes to murder rates. So it is a bit too high. It's much higher it's twice as high as Norway or Switzerland, but it's still much, much lower than the US and much lower than Russia, and I think probably lower than Canada, So, and you don't feel a threat. And I've never seen any sort of trouble. But then again, I'm not exactly a traveler, I mean, I live a very calm and quiet life, so I'm not the best judge of that at all. But I mean, it depends on when you go. Some people talk about constant harassment in the schools, gang wars, sort of, between tribal wars, as it were, and that you can't go to the cinema if you're white. I know some friends of mine who have children, boys in their teens, and they're a bit Swedish teen males are not very outgoing or assertive, and they're kind of pushed around by these Arab boys, and they don't get the girls. The Arabs get the girls, and it's funny because funny story that you have a lot of female policewomen in Sweden, and there's a big scandal because a lot of them end up sleeping with their Arab gang members, who they're supposed to be surveilling, and so this is this female thing that you mate with power. You're attracted to power. You're attracted to aggression. You're attracted to bad boys, sort of thing. So that's a scandal. These police girls, police women, can't stay in their jobs. So you hear about corruption. One of the most worrying trends. I've kind of stopped research. I felt I did my films and I was right, and I'm moving on to like global issues now. But some people talk about this. The welfare state is being infiltrated by gangs or ethnic groups who are corrupt and have tribal loyalty but no loyalty to Sweden. So like they dominate the social care or the welfare state or the unemployment offices, and they funnel money to certain causes and certain people rather than the native Swedish people, and the health service ditto. So but I haven't take it with a bit of pinch of salt. I think that to me the main thing is the fact that Sweden is becoming a little bit poorer, a little bit more violent, a little bit less secure, if you like, and a lot less traditionally Swedish. I mean, there'll be, even though I'm half Swedish, there's a lot of Swedish culture I don't know. My girlfriend sings like songs, choir songs and things like that, and pop songs from the 1970s and 80s. And there's so many things, if you grew up in a country, you just can't, the outsiders don't know about, right? And if you're a small country, and I'm not part of that. I'm not particularly interested in it, but I wish it can continue. But I'm half Swedish after all. And if it's not accessible, interesting to me, how much less interesting won't it be to somebody who's just arrived from Somalia? They go to their Swedish classes and they can't place Sweden on a map. For them, it's just a piece of territory from which they can derive welfare state money,
Yeah.
So the Swedes have done a really bad job of integrating them. I think they leave them alone. And what I hear is that, like, I don't know about Canada, but in America, it's either sink or swim. So once you start working, then you get respect for your country, the country that you're in, because you're struggling. And then you have fly the flag. You're an American and that's it. And that used to be the model for America. And it was a tough school. And then you had many migrants became almost like more American than the Americans themselves. Whereas Europe doesn't function like that at all. It's never been an immigrant society. And you don't have guns. It's a much softer society. So the American gun culture, or whatever, or sink or swim culture, probably, it gains the respect of a lot of people who come from the outside world. And I think that it also attracts people who want to succeed. I'm not talking about this large swathe of people coming in, but let's say traditionally, let's say until the last 5 years, I met migrants in Sweden who said, yeah, my cousin went to America. That's because he wanted to work. Well, we just wanted to get money from the States. So we stayed in Sweden, He worked 16 hours a day and we get a good welfare thing. So
Interesting. Is changing culture because of changing demographics, changing politics. Do you think this is having an impact on the way the public mood is right now on this?
Yeah, and it's becoming much harder.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing about Sweden was a very high trust country, and if you want to open a bank account, when I first came here, you need much less bureaucratic. The Brits always tend to think that Sweden is a sort of semi-totalitarian bureaucratic country with their laws everywhere. It's not true. It wasn't true. Very easygoing, very honest, very laid back. You could open a bank account in 5 minutes. In the UK, you need references and things like that, it was very good because people felt that they were all on the same side. And now it's much lower trust, and trust lowers transaction costs in the broader sense of society. But now everyone's on edge. A lot of people are on edge. A lot of people are coming to realize that there's too much immigration. The headlines in the newspapers are all about violence and about the things I spoke about. So that climate's definitely changed since I last dipped into the Swedish media 4 or 5 years ago, when the media were incredibly politically correct. Now they're quite frank, almost, about shootings and things like that. And I guess a lot of people are, they've realized that immigration has been a mistake, and they're stuck with it. So
yeah, can't roll things back now.
No, you can't. I don't know what to do. I mean, that's yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I think that well, two things. I mean, one is that you live separate lives, like a sort of apartheid without calling it apartheid or whatever. And that happens, people congregate to their own likes. Like white flight happens when you have more than 5% immigrants in the place, apparently. So a lot of the leftist journalists I knew in Malmo, they've moved out of Malmo. I see, you bloody hypocrites, there you are talking about beauties of having people from different cultures, and you don't do it yourself. Unless you say, I mean, what we mean is it's a lot of the elite like multiculturalism, because for them it's meeting an Indian professor at a conference, or eating Japanese food, or having friends you can Skype who live in Indonesia. And that's fantastic, because there is part of an international elite. And they think everyone's like that. But what it really is for a lot of people is rubbing shoulders. You're not so well educated, and you haven't had a good chance in life. You're working as a supermarket cashier, and you're rubbing shoulders with somebody who's also not so lucky in life from Somalia. And there's an antagonism there. Of course there is, maybe.
Yep.
So the elites are really responsible for a lot. I mean, they're naive, or a lot of people on TNT think it's part of this global plot run by the Rothschilds or something, because also, I mean, if you divide a country and have lots of ethnic groups, then they're less likely to have a democratic polity that unites and kicks out the politicians. So and they're
Yeah.
so a population is more easy to control, and they can't unite. And we have this fragmentation all over Europe now. And then, of course, there's this incredible emotional blackmail where this upper middle class, who are completely insulated from the effects of immigration, going around telling the working class, white working class, you know, they're racist or they're fascist or they're Nazis. They're not. They haven't changed. They haven't changed in 60 years. They're exactly what they always were. But they're just kind of kind of complaining about how their lives have been completely changed, and they're not consulted about it. And they see that the rich or the banking people or people working in journalism are not suffering the consequences of what they wish for everyone else. So I don't know, but sorry, just think if you, the best case scenario, I guess, is integration. That is, you have this hybrid culture, you know, but even let's suppose it succeeds. Even then, it's not going to be the Sweden that once was. It's going to be a slightly more corrupt Sweden. It's going to be more emotional Sweden, if you like. It's going to be hybrid Arabic Swedish culture somehow, and it's going to be more macho, and so because Arabs are more macho than the Swedes, and maybe worse off for women, you know. And the funny thing is, I always thought, if in a more Mediterranean southern type Sweden, women are going to lose their freedoms, or you know, I don't want to exaggerate. The difficult thing is to get it right and not to be extreme, but you know, they're very, very free at the moment and very liberated and very outspoken, but they might find themselves, you know, not quite so free. But it's women who want immigration. It's incredible, especially young women. And I think it's I don't know, they're real outliers. I mean, young women especially, whether it's a kind of sexual thing, you know, they love the idea of these cool guys, you know, army generation coming from Syria or whatever, or whether just really group thinkers. They're more conformist because they just come out of school. But it's so one of my films talks about how the women are sort of the losers, and they're the ones who want immigration. And you can own in a democracy where you have women and men. If men had the men, the kind of people who could only vote 100 years ago, that is men over 40 or something, the guardians of society, you wouldn't have had this immigration. It's because you have immigration that includes people with no life experience voting for things they don't have any knowledge about. But there you go.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on over there in Sweden, because with this Eurovision festival, today we're seeing Israel issuing a travel advisory urging people to not go to the festival because they say there's a real threat of Jewish people possibly being attacked. We're seeing the organizers of the festival saying they're ready to take Palestinian flags down. Can you give us a sense of what's really happening there?
Well, I'm actually going down next week because my mum lives in Malmo, so I'm going to be staying in her flat, just to get a flavor of the atmosphere. And so I'm just relying on what I read in the newspapers, and I know that they're very worried, obviously, because it's quite a heavily Muslim town. And so in the Israeli song, which originally written to commemorate October 7, which is rewritten because it was too sensitive for Eurovision, the Israelis are warning people. Swedish commentators I speak to seriously think there's going to be a terrorist attack. I don't actually think so. I think it won't be as bad as everyone says, or some people fear. But certainly they've warned. And I've been witness to previous riots in Malmo. I know my mum's doctor, she's Jewish. She turned up at my mum's flat when I happened to be visiting, and she'd just been chased down the streets by a couple of young Muslims. She was protesting something or other. I can't remember what. I think it was maybe some sports event, including Israelis. So there were quite a lot of Jews after World War II because Sweden took in a lot of Jews after the Nazis. You know, it was a safe haven as a neutral country, and Malmo was the nearest big city to the continent. So Malmo was famous for being a place of refuge, and that was played upon by the pro-migrationists, saying, well, we let in the Jews in 1945. We've still got to open our hearts for refugees fleeing from Syria, so on. So it became known as a haven for Jews, but a lot of the Jews have actually gone. they've gone to Stockholm or to Israel because they don't feel safe in Sweden, in Malmö. So there's a synagogue there, but it's very heavily protected. But I think anything that the Jews could have suffered from, they've already had. So I don't think there's going to be an up. I don't think I could be proved wrong, but I don't think the material is there for combustion, to be honest, because they're not simply not enough Jews left, so they're not nearly enough numbers. But we'll see. Yeah.
Very interesting, and I see that you have groups. Some people calling for boycotting the festival now because of the stance they've taken.
I think some left-wing groups have pulled out. They're sort of, I think maybe they were going to have a week of festivities. I mean, when I grew up, the Eurovision Song Contest was just one night, right? And it was a joke, and they were mostly singing in French, and it was very old-fashioned. And it's become this extravaganza of huge proportions where everyone in Europe takes part. And so the one night has been extended to like a week. So it's going to be a week of semi-finals and things like that. And then they've got sub bands and sub events taking place in other venues, even an ABBA venue. ABBA have temporarily set up a museum or something because it's the 50th anniversary of their Waterloo hit. So, and some of those bands I think have jumped off because they associate Eurovision with being pro-Israel. Yeah.
I see there's a Queers for Palestine group that is calling for a boycott. That seems almost it's an upside down world.
Yeah, you mean because the Muslims are.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing, obviously, I think about queers and all that is that, let's say Trump, I was just talking to a Trump pollster. I'm not moving away from the subject, but he said that Trump is appealing to a lot of, because the relative social conservatism of the blue collar voter is more aligned with that of Muslims in some respects than with the liberal left, in their gay. So a lot of Hispanics can't stand this woke stuff that their school kids are being taught. But yeah, Gays for Palestine. Mind you, I had one of my best friends is gay, and he's a producer in Al Jazeera, and he says that there are a lot of gays in the Gulf states. They just don't talk about it. So
yeah. So tell people how they can find your work.
Well, just Google my name, Pelle Neroth Taylor, on Neroth Taylor on Amazon. You'll find my books. We don't have to talk about those, but they're on Cold War topics and on World War One.
Yeah.
And I'm just coming out on Trump and Watergate and Kennedy. And then you could go into Amazon Prime and you can see my 2 films there. We've got several more films in the pipeline. And then watch my show on tntradio.live. I'm on at 4 to 6 p.m. European time. So that's 10 to 12 noon American time, Eastern time zone. And I do talk a little about American topics. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think I strike up great rapport with Americans and Canadians because I'm an outsider who knows quite a lot about their country, and they have a British accent, and they open up, and because I'm not quite as partisan, and they're curious to reveal their story to an outsider. So I get a lot of good stories from Americans and North Americans. I'm enjoying it very much. So if you're in North America, do tune in and try and get some more Canadians as well.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, you're writing a book about Trump.
Trump. Watergate, which was a CIA operation, and Kennedy was a CIA operation, and the Trump thing the whole Russiagate thing was a CIA takedown. But I realized talking to these very clever people that my theme is not very original. So I've actually put it on the shelf, and I'm reconsidering what to do, because when you're only writing for, let's say, a European audience, a Swedish audience, and it can seem quite original because a lot of intellectuals in Europe are really stuck. They read the Washington Post and they believe the Washington Post and New York Times and CNN. They really do. And for them, it's an original work, but not for an American audience. So I have to think about what to do. But we'll see what happens. But the World War I one is very original, and it's like a primer on the way that diplomacy works, and the way that history is not very seldom what you think it is. Throw away all the school history books, because everything I've examined turns out to be different. And I'm just going by archives. I'm not sort of making things up. It's just that, yeah.
So give me your take on the U.S. presidential election.
Well, very good question. I mean, it seems as if Trump is going to squeak a narrow win, but RFK is a wild card, and he attracts a lot of independent voters and younger voters. And I was just talking to a guy, so I think that Trump might struggle to win, even if the election isn't stolen. I mean, a lot of people complained about the stolen election in 2020. Nobody's done anything to prevent it from happening in 2024, and with 8 million illegal migrants or something. I mean, to what extent can't they cheat? So I'm going to go with my hope, which is that there'll be a Trump win and that he'll close down the Ukraine war on day 2. That's basically it, because that's what we worry about in Europe, is war, and then you can run your own domestic policy as you see fit, basically. But that's your problem. And
right.
Yeah.
Where do you see RFK fitting in here? Just yesterday, they had this event where they're saying that there's no way for Biden to win. They're campaigning now on this idea. They're trying to project this narrative that RFK Jr. is not a spoiler. I don't know if you were clued into what happened with that yesterday.
I didn't
But
actually know.
yeah, and so he's taking a no spoiler pledge, or is willing
Right.
to do that,
Right.
trying to, I think, rope Biden into this, to sign this thing and take a poll. And if Biden can't win, then he's supposed to drop out. He'll never do it. But it's an odd campaign strategy that they
Yeah.
came up with yesterday.
I can't comment on that. I think that RFK is a clever guy, and I admire him as far as I can tell. But interestingly, he was actually offered the vice president. He said yes to being Trump's vice president, and I always thought he'd said no, because he's kind of the principled kind of guy. He said no. According to my source interview, he wanted to be vice presidential candidate, but Trump said no. So Trump didn't want to share his ego, and I think that's a loss for Trump, because I think if Trump and RFK got together, I think they would more likely win the presidency. What do you think?
Oh, I think that would be a winning card for sure. But
Yeah,
I said from
absolutely.
the beginning that I never saw that happening for exactly those reasons. It's about ego, and I don't
Right.
think the two of them are compatible,
Probably not.
honestly.
No, no.
Yeah, yeah,
So, and maybe Trump reaches some of those, I don't know, chauvinist parts, if you like, that RFK doesn't reach, and they could complement each other. But I can't really decide. When you got those 3-way races, it's like a complicated dynamic. It's hard. I'd have to read up on it before I make a call about whether it harms Biden or harms RFK. They've got so much to read, though. So much to read, because you've got these 4 guests today, and it's an awful amount of research, a lot of research.
yeah. Well, a lot of speculation too about who Trump will pick as his running mate. Do you
Yeah,
have
I don't know.
any
Have you?
thoughts?
I haven't. I heard maybe Tulsi Gabbard and um, a guy called JD Vance. He's another clever guy, actually. I wouldn't mind him. He's also an isolation, or he understands what's at stake in Ukraine, and he understands the real situation there. He wrote a good piece, I think, for the Washington Post, and he's sensible in a lot of things, and younger, and maybe not as much. Kennedy's like almost the same age as Trump, but I think Vance is in his 40s, so it could
Yeah.
be a good match.
Well, I think maybe Kristi Noem was the pick. And what tells me that is that 2 days ago, she was hauled into the court of public opinion because of her new book, which talks about her killing her dog, putting her dog down in a gravel pit with a gun and a goat. And there,
Oh,
so this has hurt her image publicly. And so that's telling me that they came after her because they must have been thinking that she was going to be the pick. But I guess it all remains to be seen if she can
mm,
recover and where Trump goes with things.
mm.
Pelle, is there anything else you'd like to add today or think that I might be
No,
missing?
it's very nice. I'm very interested in Canada. We could talk much longer about this, because said with the Pierre Trudeau connection, and
yes.
it's your Anglo, and how you cope with having French. I lived in Brussels for a while, and Brussels has that Montreal feel somehow because cultures mixing, and it's a French-speaking city inside a Dutch-speaking country or part of the country, and so I just wanted to know what Canada makes Canada ticks, because I do get on with the Commonwealth people even more than Americans some way, because of like when I talk to Australians, we share the same sense of humor, whereas Americans not quite, because they're a little bit more different, a bit more independent our way. So I'm fascinated by Canada, and so it's like a mixture of Swedish and English in a way, English culture, but like Swedish climate, Scandinavian climate. But I can't really, I don't think I can. I don't feel ready to talk about it right now.
Yeah. Well, we'll have you back
I have to come on
and
again.
yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this very much. And I look forward to having you on the program again.
Oh, absolutely. And you can come on mine as well. You can be each other's mutual support. Anyway, yeah. Good. All right. Thank you. Well, a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks, Rick.
Maverick News. Fighting for freedom.
The information war is raging. Truth without integrity is worth nothing. Maverick News. Because those who have power and those who seek it must be held accountable.
The world is watching.
Join our family of truth seekers. Donate today and add your voice to the chorus of Maverick Knights. Donate at maverickdonations.com. Truth. Integrity. It's the Maverick way. Maverick News. The world is watching.
There's my microphone unmuted now. And what I was saying is, if you'd like to support the program, you can do that by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please subscribe over on Rumble. If you're over on YouTube, make sure you hit that notification bell. And then you won't miss any of our upcoming videos, because if YouTube does what it's supposed to do, it'll email you and let you know when we have new content posted. You can also donate at maverickdonations.com through the Give Send Go, or at freedomreporters.com. And if you donate $50, $30 or more, I can send you a free t-shirt. And if you donate $45 or more, I can send you a long sleeve tee. And $60 or more, and I can send you an embroidered shirt, long sleeve, a Dickies shirt. Not like this one. They're actually nicer. I think we've got hoodies back in stock as well. I haven't even looked in the box, but I'm pretty sure there are hoodies in there. So if you do that, just make sure you attach a note to tell me what size you need, and everything comes in black, because that's the Maverick News colors: black, white, and red. So, yeah, it's been a good conversation. Really appreciate Pelle joining us on the program. Very smart guy, great journalist, and we were lucky to have him spend some time with us here tonight. And I am going to wrap things up It is getting near the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody, for spending your evening here. A privilege, as always. And I will be back tomorrow night. Same time, same channel, right here on the Maverick News channel, where we have the antivirus programs for your mind. Catch you on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.